I'm Davy. I'm awesome. And welcome to Davy's Awesome Wrestling, where I review wrestling-related things, all from the perspective of a fan, not an insider. So this week I'm going to be reviewing a documentary that is currently on the WWE Network. This documentary was made in 2020. A Future WWE, the FCW Story. Those of us who are super wrestling marks like I am, were very aware of what FCW was. It was WWE's developmental territory before they came up with NXT. And of course this documentary is encompassing how it came about, how it thrived, and ultimately how it ended. It opens with Steve Keirn, who was the owner and operator of FCW, and basically the cliff notes into him getting into wrestling. And how by this time he was older, he was retired, he was a road agent for WWE, but he wasn't really happy with being a road agent. He liked to teach. It was Steve Keirn's passion to teach wrestling to the new generation. And at the time, WWE had several developmental territories. They had OVW, they had HWA, and they had Deep South Wrestling. All these were developmental territories. Now the misconception was that WWE owned these territories. They didn't own them, they were independently owned, they just had a contract with these companies to train their talent. So basically it was kind of cool for a promoter to have this contract because they did of course get a fee from WWE, not to mention free talent. But around this time, WWE was talking about, let's just do one developmental territory. So John Laurinaitis offered to Steve Keirn, how about you open your own territory out in Tampa, Florida, and we'll make that our only developmental territory. So Steve Keirn did just that. He opened up FCW. Kind of an homage to his favorite territory that he grew up watching, and even being a wrestler in, Championship Wrestling from Florida. So he came up with Florida Championship Wrestling. Must have taken him days to come up with that name. And of course chronicling how he found the FCW arena, which was really just a section of a warehouse. A warehouse in Tampa, Florida, with no air conditioning. But also gathering his team of trainers, because he understands that not one person can teach everything about wrestling to all these new guys. It's just impossible. So he got an ensemble of some of the best trainers in the world, like Dr. Tom Pritchard, Joey Mercury, Billy Kidman, Norman Smiley, and to help the talent with their interview and mic skills, one of the greatest promo guys to ever live, the American Dream Dusty Rhodes, baby. Rest in peace, Dream. Of course, some of the commentators in this were people that were FCW graduates. Guys like Heath Slater, who now just goes by Heath in Impact, who was one of the first into the FCW arena, considering he was already in developmental when FCW came about. He went from wrestling in Deep South Wrestling to FCW. Guys who would later come into the fray, like Seth Rollins, or Drew McIntyre, or Sheamus. All these guys, former WWE champions. Interviews from the ladies, like Sasha Banks, Bayley, and even some who graduated and moved on to the main roster, but have long since moved on from WWE, like Serena Deeb. Current veteran wrestlers like Natalya, and her husband Tyson Kidd. And even some of the talent that had never ever wrestled before coming to FCW, the ones that did not start in the independents, like Charlotte Flair. Which, yes, there was a lot of talent in FCW that immediately got signed by WWE and put into FCW. However, it talks about they didn't get the easy ride that people think. No, Steve Keirn, he made them travel around Florida. Wrestling in dive bars and high school gymnasiums and all that stuff. They got the full independent experience while they learned to develop their skills in front of audiences. They took us through the process of how they came up with their names. Like as it's long been documented, WWE does not like people using their real names or names they used on the independents. They don't like it. They want them to come up with new names that they can brand. As if any wrestler who has not succeeded after leaving WWE didn't succeed just simply because they had to change their name. But the process apparently being that they would write down a list of names, submit it, whichever ones they liked, they give them back with, okay, pick between those. If they didn't like any, they tell them try again. For example, Baron Corbin having to send in like 3 different lists of names, all being rejected until he had 3 to pick from, and Baron Corbin was the best one, so he took it. And again, it could be worse, now he's Happy Corbin. Or Seth Rollins, who came in from Ring of Honor as Tyler Black, but Dusty Rhodes sat him down and said, I see you as Seth Rollins. Or Bayley, who came in as Davina, but then Bayley being one of the names that they decided for her, and her saying, well, can I spell it B-A-Y since I'm from the Bay Area? Talked about Dusty Rhodes' communication class, where he taught him how to do promos, and showed us some of the raw footage of these guys coming around and developing their promo skills. Some of them had to work at it and eventually get good at it, like Corey Graves, who admits that he wasn't great, But now he's a commentator, and in my opinion, the best commentator WWE has. Or some guys who are just naturals at it, like Bray Wyatt. And then people who just couldn't get it, like a guy they talked about that was going by the name Nick Rogers, who we'd never heard of because he never got out of developmental. One of the reasons being that apparently they'd have him go to promo class and told him to stop saying the same exact promo over and over and over again because he just kept using the same exact one, which didn't work on Dusty because they'd even talked about other guys who would come in, do a good promo, and then a few weeks later, when they figured everybody had forgotten about it, would try it again, and Dusty would flag him on it, like, you already said all this. But this guy, Nick Rogers, doing the same promo every time, tried to change it up by changing the first 30 seconds and then going into his same old promo, and showed a clip of Dusty cutting him off. Which, as a fan watching this documentary, just, that seems so cool. As a fan, who would not have loved to be a fly on the wall in a class where Dusty Rhodes is teaching people how to do promos? It went into the wrestlers who were not accepted at first because they were signed by WWE and immediately sent to developmental, having never wrestled before in their lives. Wrestlers like the Bella Twins, who went on to have great careers, become very good wrestlers themselves, and help usher in this whole women's revolution we've had. They struggled a bit because they just could not be accepted as anything but a pretty face. But even that, how FCW helped usher in the women's revolution, because yes, it started with the typical WWE thing where these girls were having bikini contests and stuff, but developed into them having some really good, fast-paced, brutal matches that started getting the attention of people in Florida and the people on the internets watching these and going, hey, why aren't we seeing that on the main roster? It went into all the second and third generation talent that passed through FCW. Some moving along to the main roster and having very successful careers. Guys like Roman Reigns, who started in FCW as Leaki. Bray Wyatt, who went through a slew of names, like Duke Rotundo, Husky Harris, until he finally got to Bray Wyatt. But then some of those generational talents who just did not make it to the main roster. Guys like Wes Briscoe, who still wrestles, but just never got out of FCW, mostly because it hurt his leg. Or Richie Steamboat, who had all the talent, but just couldn't live up to his father's legacy. The documentary not only went into their live shows, but also went into the fact that these guys, the wrestlers, had to be the ring crew, the ones setting up and taking down the wrestling rings. It got into what the wrestlers were anticipating and also dreading the call-ups. Anticipating because they all wanted to go to the main roster. Dreading because some of them kept getting passed up. Kind of like now with NXT. There's no rhyme or reason to who gets called up to the main roster. It's not, okay, you've been there this amount of time, it's your turn. It's just, if they see somebody that they happen to think can do something, they'll pull them up. So some guys and girls were in developmental for a couple of weeks. Some guys and girls were in developmental for years. Some of them never got out of developmental. And even brought up NXT Season 1. Remember the first couple of seasons when it was presented as a reality show where they had to do challenges and stuff? And it was stupid and awful. But eventually became what we know now. When Triple H took over developmental. That was the end of FCW. The contract was up, and they decided not to re-sign it. Triple H was very instrumental in building the WWE Performance Center, which was in Orlando, where they were going to learn everything they needed to know about wrestling in a facility that had everything to teach. There's places to learn promos, there's several rings, there's gyms, there's camera setups, so they can learn how to use all that. Basically, it equips them completely to get to the main roster now. And Seth Rollins mentioning his favorite thing, it was air-conditioned. But because of Triple H taking over and making it into now NXT, the people from FCW had to make a decision. Do they want to move on and get other jobs with WWE, maybe with developmental, or do they just want to end it there? Steve Keirn opted to end it there because he didn't want to move out of Tampa. But he couldn't keep FCW going on his own, so it folded and is now a bounce house. Which NXT was the next logical step. Personally, watching this documentary was very cool because it brought up some memories of me watching FCW. I know some of you are going like, how did you watch FCW when you were on the West Coast? It's called YouTube. People would upload episodes. Because FCW was only available in Florida. And then when NXT first started as its own brand, and not just a reality show, it was also only available in Florida and parts of Canada unless you had Hulu. You could watch it there, which is where I first started watching NXT. And it was just the natural progression. It's sad that it'd go away. It had some great innovations, some great matches, and it was great watching as these guys were becoming the next generation of WWE talent. And this documentary was really cool for those of us who did like FCW, or even if you never watched FCW, just to kind of see behind the scenes work. I think you should check out A Future WWE, the FCW Story. I recommend it. So there you have it. That's my wrestling video this week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure to hit like, hit subscribe, hit that little bell so you get notifications for when I post new videos, and leave a comment. Tell me what you thought of A Future WWE, the FCW Story. Love you guys.